What is freedom of speech? For you, it might be as easy as writing a letter to your congressman. But for a health insurance lobbyist, free speech isn't free.
So what have I got to do to earn this?
Absolutely nothing.
Last year, the health sector spent $650 million expressing their opinions to lawmakers. Did your freedom of speech cost that much?
Where's all this competition we've heard?
Then why don't you shut up and let them do the talking?
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right.
It's essential that our intelligence community know who our enemies are talking to, what they're saying, and what they're planning.
Some people took advantage, I think, of 9/11 to bend the law, to break the law, and to recraft the law, to trample on the rights of American citizens.
After 9/11, the intelligence budget doubled.
They're using us, because we're suckers, to make the Constitution oppression ready for all Americans. And it's ready now.
The FBI's tendency to focus on minority communities and political dissenters is by no means a new development.
COINTELPRO was a counterintelligence program that the FBI had in place in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s.
They conducted a program that targeted groups like anti-war protesters, the Women's Liberation Movement, and others.
The most egregious was Dr. Martin Luther King, who was subject to intensive investigation, and many of these dirty tricks that the church committee that later investigated this program found that these dirty tricks were designed not to protect the national security, but to disrupt marriages, to prevent people from engaging in First Amendment protected activities, and to suppress speech.
In 2008, the FBI infiltrated a series of First Amendment groups in Minneapolis that were organizing during the Republican National Convention. 2 years later, in fall 2010, the FBI raided dozens of peace activists in Chicago and Minneapolis, dragged these individuals before secret grand juries, seized all of their computer records, and they've never been charged with any crimes.
All of the groups, the Women Against Military Madness, for instance, 25-year-long established peace group, is on a chart, and it's on a link analysis that the Department of Homeland Security prepared in the summer of 2008, connecting everybody guilt by association. And you look at it, there's nothing there. It's just fabricated out of whole cloth.
You to step aside and circle around in a mournful, prayerful way for 5 minutes.
So Catholic workers, Friends, that is Quakers, people who are devoted to peacemaking, who are nonviolent people in the tradition of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., those people should be protected. Those people should be put on a pedestal rather than be followed around and having their phones tapped.
Standards for identifying and categorizing potential bad guys are not nearly precise enough. And we go back to examples like the Thomas Merton Center. Those people are not the enemy. They are citizens of the United States exercising their First Amendment rights.
The Bill of Rights are really the concretization of our freedom. The Patriot Act makes a travesty of many of those rights.
When a government is trying to find out what you're reading, that is fundamentally Orwellian.
People say that they don't mind the government spying because they're not doing anything wrong, but what we learned from those investigations that the Church and Pike committees conducted back in the 1970s was that there were people who were doing nothing wrong and yet were harmed, were prevented from getting jobs, all because of this secret surveillance and collected this information that the FBI was misusing to harm people who really had absolutely done nothing wrong, and yet were merely expressing opinions that the government didn't like.
Well, it's a bill that has received very little attention, but may make free speech a felony and seriously restrict your right to political protest. Just signed into law by the president, H.R. 347 gives federal agents sweeping powers to arrest and bring felony charges against citizens engaged in protests where the Secret Service is present. Joining us now with more, Fox News senior judicial analyst, good friend, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, the thing that jumps out off the page, felony?
Yeah, felony means more than a year in jail. This is not like a traffic ticket. For standing and protesting, the type of thing that for 230 years Americans took for granted because it was protected by the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, has actually been abridged by legislation the president signed last Thursday, supported overwhelmingly by both parties, with very, very little public debate and very little debate in Congress. Basically allows Secret Service agents to decide where there are no free speech zones, not speech zones, no free speech zones. And anybody by the Secret Service can, protected by the Secret Service, can ask those agents to ban protests wherever they are. So I can think of 3 violations: speech violations, association violations, the right to petition the government for a redress of your grievances. What good is free speech if the people in the government are so far away from you that they can't hear you?
This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system announcing the commencement of the annual purge sanctioned by the U.S. government. Weapons of Class 4 and lower have been authorized for use during the purge. All other weapons are restricted. Government officials of ranking 10 have been granted immunity from the purge and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any and all crime, including murder, will be legal for 12 continuous hours. Police, fire, and emergency medical services will be unavailable until tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. when the purge concludes. Blessed be our new founding fathers and America, a nation reborn. May God be with you all.